Leftover lasagne.
Leftover lasagna.
Lasagna? No way.
It's a type of sandwich.
Some kind of gross pasta.
Leftover Lasagna is a
podcast
hosted by
my
Nitin
church
Sundar and Tony Uncle. Leftover Lasagna.
Very funny name.
Hello and welcome to Leftover Lasagne, the weekly-ish podcast that combines the sublime and the ridiculous to build curious smile. Build curious smile, of course, is an anagram of the words sublime and ridiculous. I am Tony, the guy who thinks anagrams are a great joke format for an audio podcast and that jokes are better with footnotes. Much like sentences are better with bonus content in parentheses. Do you think so? And with me is my long-suffering co-host, the lucky few who have the lucky few who have tasted Nitin Sundar have said that he's always better when you squeeze some lime on top. Probably because he's salty. No, wait, they didn't say that. They said he tastes better with lime on top. They said he tastes sublime. Sublime. Say hi, Nitin Sundar. As we are waiting for this week's lasagna to heat up in the microwave, I actually want to take a couple of moments to indulge in the sublime and the ridiculous, even more ridiculous, right? So, Nitin, when we were recording our cricket pod on Tuesday, you had mentioned that one of the happiest sights this week was seeing Jonathan Trott celebrate with joy after probably last seeing him in action over a decade ago, right?
Yeah.
So, for our non-cricketing audiences, can you explain why you felt this way in a non-cricketing context?
Sure. So Jonathan Trott is was an English cricketer, a very prolific batsman for England, and he played, I think, in the late 2000s, early 2010s, all the way up to 2013. Coincidentally, was part of one of the greatest England Test teams, which also won the Ashes in Australia, which they generally don't tend to do. Unfortunately, his career ended in a very, I'd say in a slightly depressing fashion. And I say depressing within quotes because he was actually part of, this was during a return Ashes again back in Australia where Mitchell Johnson, the Australian fast bowler, terrorized a lot of English batsmen by bowling extremely fast and short. He was at his lethal best in some sense. And Trott was one of those victims. And I think he actually was, physically in danger, or felt he was in physical danger facing up to Mitchell Johnson. And there was a certain fear that was seen in his eyes, which was preyed upon by the Australian team. The Australian captain famously went up, I think, to Trott and said, "Get ready for a broken fucking arm," when Trott was about to face up to Mitchell Johnson in one of those games. And Trott's career actually came to an abrupt standstill after that. And he later even revealed that he had mental health issues. I don't know if he revealed his mental health issues during his playing days or immediately after his playing days, but when it came out, or at least when
I think it was in his autobiography, right, which is called Unguarded, I believe.
Okay.
Where
So then,
he basically spoke about this.
Exactly. He left after the first test, and this was still, cricket is a game that has had lots of issues with mental health, which have really come to the light, I would say, since 2000. I think when Marcus Trescothick, another English batsman, wrote a wonderful autobiography where he spoke about his battles with mental health right through his international career. And since then, several cricketers have come out and spoken about it. Right. So it started becoming a little more mainstream. But the way Mitchell Johnson was sort of written about before this came out, as if he was backing away from being brave, and that there was a sign of mental weakness in the way he could not handle the pressure against Australia and left the Ashes midway through. All of that seemed a little too. It seemed even worse in the light of what he later would come and write about. Anyway, so Trott went out of public conscious for most of the last 10 years. He re-emerged last year, I think, as the coach of the Afghanistan cricket team, and has been a part of their wonderful resurgence in cricket, where they did really well in the One Day World Cup last year and made it to the semi-finals of the T20 World Cup that's going on right now. Unfortunately, lost in the semi-finals, but even the semi-finals is a massive achievement. They've defeated much stronger teams. They dumped Australia out famously and so on. So I was just happy to see someone like Jonathan Trott come back and clearly add a lot of value to a team in a place where you might not have thought someone like him might actually emerge. So yeah, just happy to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually, in some senses, relate to that journey, right? And wanted to sort of briefly speak about it because there was this great sort of ad that I think came out. So this is basically a message that says Stephen has depression, right? And in the foreground, there is a slightly oldish man looking not extremely happy, and in the background there is actually a couple and a guy is smiling, right? And basically the smaller copy points out and says the guy in the background who's smiling is Stephen, and right, and he has depression, right? So
Yeah.
many times it's not apparent, Nitin, and I told you when I was in a funk and I couldn't like feel the joy in anything I was doing. And then it was like a year ago, you used to check in on me from time to time, right? And I felt, and obviously I didn't know how to articulate it at that point, but you being there was like really amazing, right? And at the end of it, when I got out of the funk, I told you, right? Like it just went
Yeah.
away one day. I mean, I'm not sure I handled it in the most healthy sort of manner, but luckily I got out of it, right? So I think a couple of things that I wanted to say, maybe, check in on your friends from time to time, or get a friend like Nitin Sundar who will check in on you from time to time if you're lucky. But yeah, just wanted to say Leftover Lasagna is a product of, coming out of that and then getting into everything with like renewed fervor and finding joy in things that I'm doing and stuff like that, right? And so much so that after about a year, in the last 4 to 6 months, things have been going spectacularly, not because, of things that I've done in the last 1 year, just that things have aligned, right? So much so that I've sort of got into a mode, if you remember on the last episode, where I suddenly said, wait, am I boasting too much? And then it came up when I was speaking to someone else also, right? To sort of suddenly check to say, wait, am I? So I did the only logical thing. I asked my wife, Rosanna, do you think I'm boasting too much? And she basically replied saying, all I asked you was, do you want to finish the biryani left overnight? Why are you plugging your podcast? Right? No. That's a joke. She was actually quite sweet about it. She said, look, boast to me if you want to, but maybe like, check yourself in the public conscience, right? So, yeah, that's one thing that's been on my mind. However, the other thing that I learned from, and many of our long-time collaborators, Chuck, right, with whom I've done a bunch of stuff, is also to take pride in what you do, right? Like, and very famously, I plug Leftover Lasagna without shame anywhere, even in conversations with my wife. But that is important, right? And I think just wanted to call that out and also tell you, Nitin, that I actually love you, right? And
what a surprise!
The
Plot
second
twist.
part,
Didn't see that coming.
yeah, the second part, which was a little bit magical, was that I was speaking to a friend of mine. Her name is Nisha. And something magical happened, and obviously a magical act has three parts, right? There's the pledge, the turn, and the prestige. Pledge is where the magician shows you something normal and everyday, and turn is when they do something extraordinary with it which you were not expecting, and you can't figure out the trick. But in the prestige, they bring it back, right? So
Yeah.
I was speaking to her, and she was basically saying, you guys are actually pretty brave and bold to not edit out the fantasies part in that episode of Leftover Lasagna. And I'm like, wait, you listen to Leftover Lasagna? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, what do you think? And I'm bracing for feedback here because she's usually very incisive with her feedback and doesn't miss a chance to pull my leg, right? So, but she's like, no, I really love Leftover Lasagna. It's been a pleasure listening to it. And I'm like, huh? This doesn't seem, normal. And I'm waiting for the prestige, right? Which comes up thusly, and I can't repeat her words exactly because it's a family podcast. But this is the request from Nisha. Nitin, can you, in your whiskey honey voice, say "Happy birthday, Nisha"?
Okay, here goes. Happy birthday, Nisha. Thank you so much for listening to Leftover Lasagna. Happy birthday, Nisha. Happy birthday, Nisha. Happy birthday, Nisha. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nish, for giving us a viable business model. Right. So, dear viewers, if you would like Nitin Sundar to wish you or your friends in his whiskey honey voice, along with his, amazing face, we will charge a fee. We'll have tiers to this, depending on what you expect Nitin to do. But
Yeah.
we are on a path to profit, Nitin.
Yes. We will add tears to this, but keep your listenership going because otherwise you will add tears to us. So, a great set of words to start off, Tony. One thing that I really love and appreciate about you is how much of yourself you put out there, right? And it's something that I would love to be able to emulate. I do feel I'm a lot more guarded than you are when it comes to putting everything out there. But yeah, you are
Correct.
an inspiration in that sense, and yeah, thank you. I feel very flattered to have been of help to you. Not even knowing that I was, but yeah.
Yeah, no, so I think it's also important to appreciate and celebrate your friends when they're there for you, right? And it's not a thing that we do often enough. So, yeah, man, love you. So,
Mwah.
just on that point, right? One of the long term creators on social media, Manu Prasad, who goes by Manuscripts, right? Has this podcast where he speaks about marketing, and when he's talking about basically creating a personal brand with Karthik, Beast of Travel. It's a good episode, and they're talking about basically something called a curated authenticity, right, which is what we put out there in the world on social media. You also spoke of the masks that we wear, etc., etc. But I feel like our filters are slightly lesser. No, I mean, obviously we are not putting 100% of ourselves out there, but just in some senses I feel it's okay to be vulnerable. Like, it's fine. What's a big deal?
Yeah, all good, very good. Yeah, I hope to be able to remove few more masks. I'm trying to learn from you, as I was saying. So yeah.
Yeah. Remove all your masks. I mean, the I don't know how to enter into our topic for the day, which is broadly the remit of merit. I want to say we also have a
Nice.
timer here.
Oh my god. Rayal Demrit was a West Indian all-rounder, nondescript. Descript rhymes with emerit and merit.
And you're an Emirati now, so
Oh my
yeah.
god. The remit for today's episode is merit, and I felt that as two engineer MBA males in India
Yeah.
in the 30s,
Yeah.
in their 30s, who have gone through the system and
Yeah.
come out supposedly on top, Tony and
Yeah.
me are well primed to talk about this topic. Also, because I
Yeah.
feel through the course of this journey, I think our own opinions on what merit is and what our own
Correct.
accomplishments are and how we view the world around us have also changed, I do feel, for both of us. So I think we are in a good place to talk
Yeah.
about this. So yeah, take it away,
Yeah.
Tony.
So interesting, right? Which is like one of my own favorite jokes while I'm blowing my trumpet. Why don't I do it fully? Was that have you ever noticed how the people who usually write two roads diverged in a yellow wood and I took the path less traveled by are usually engineer plus MBAs, right? Like we are wanting
Yeah,
to differentiate after taking up the most obvious kind of path that was available to us. Also function of the times, I suppose, right? So, but
no,
then
but
let's get
no.
into it.
On that note, right? It's actually very profound that you mentioned that quote because the
Yeah.
road less taken is actually engineering and MBA because lots of people try to walk that route,
Huh.
right? If you see the number of people who drop off, unable to actually get into that road, it is actually the
Yeah.
road less taken in
Okay.
that sense, right? So
Sure.
yeah, which no, which is where the whole merit thing
You've
comes in,
turned it
right?
on its head. Yeah.
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 Yeah,
True.
now you've taken a U-turn. We're going back to the main road where the fork
Yeah.
meets. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think for this episode, obviously, there's a bunch of things that I want to ask you, and hopefully, one of the things that we end up doing is at least at some point disagree, right? And I think also in terms of when I mentioned about the luck that was involved in sort of me coming out of whatever funk I was in, and
Yeah.
Nitin being there and us starting this podcast. I feel like one thing that we didn't acknowledge in the last episode, which became apparent after the episode released, is that there are at least two of my friends who, share a non-reconcilable relationship with their dad, right? And I feel like in our privilege of having that luck, we probably didn't, sort of sensitivize ourselves enough to some of the points that we were making. But I mean, it's okay. Just
Yeah.
that what privilege is basically things that you're completely unaware of, right? And
Exactly.
privilege
Yeah.
probably is a thing that we'll get into a lot. But going back to basics, right? I think let's define what meritocracy is, right? And the historical origins of it. Do you know why meritocracy came about?
No. Please tell our gentle listeners and your
Yeah.
gentle co-panelists as well.
So yeah, so the previous version of, I mean, before civilization, democracy, I mean, not civilization, before democracy and democratic way of working, etc. Obviously, the prominent one was to assume that God has created you in a certain place and time, and fate is what it's all about, right? So you had sort of feudalism, nepotism, etc. So like wealth passes on to someone, the job that someone does is what their kids do, and so on and so forth, which meant that there was a certain fatalistic thing to it, to say if I am sort of born the son of a
Yeah.
peasant, then a peasant is all I'll ever be, right? So in some senses, meritocracy wanted to break out of that whole thing to say, you know what, no, everyone is created equal, right? Which means that if you are more intelligent than, let's say, king's son, then maybe you
Yeah.
can ascend to the power, right? And structures also change, democracy came about, etc., etc. And therefore, it is about probably what you're naturally gifted with plus the effort you put in, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is primarily where we've reached. And sort of the dark side of that is when you're saying that, let's say, intelligence, for lack of a better word, plus effort is what it takes to get to where you are. You're essentially saying that then anyone who doesn't make it there is either lazy or not worth it, right? Like
Yeah.
it is that is the corollary to it. Whereas in the earlier system, it was just that they just born where they are. It's nothing they can do to help themselves, right? So I feel like this is one aspect that we've never thought about, right? To say, we've made it in engineering, MBA, etc. And then at some points, for sure, we would have thought that the people, we deserve to be there in some sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Because of the effort that we put in.
Yeah. No, exactly, right. I think we spoke, or I briefly spoke about my upbringing, my growing up days as a child, right? And I even casually, I would say, mentioned how it was a hard life, right? Where I was living in a typical middle class upbringing, where my parents
Yeah.
were kind of saving up to try and give me and my brother our best shots at life. But even
Yeah.
as I was saying that, and definitely on reflecting on what I said in the previous episode, I realized how tone deaf I really was, because
Yeah.
we were actually extremely privileged circumstances, right? To be
Obviously, yeah.
where my parents could actually make those kinds of choices, which meant that they had certain mileage, right? To be able to make those kinds of choices to put me and my brother through a certain life in the middle of a big city, where education was very primary to what we were doing. And for me, that real realization only came after I made it to my engineering college, right? And while growing up, one of the things that was always drilled into us was that we'll have to work very hard because there are reservations. It's tougher to if you're not in the reserve category, it's going to be tougher to make the cut.
Correct.
And all of that. So you're like, okay, this is an extra race that I'll have to run. It's going to be harder to make it, etc., because there are lesser seats and so on for the general unreserved category. But then you go to college and you see the kids who actually made it through, right, reservations, and you see the race that they were running was an entirely different race, right? And I think there was this quote from Bollywood. What is that actor's name? I forget his name. Where in the context of nepotism, like you. That is true. He does look like you.
Siddhant
Chaturvedi, is it? Yeah. I think that's his name.
Chaturvedi. Siddhant Chaturvedi. Like lots of people have said I look like him, and I'm like, hey, no.
No, yeah. Now that you mention it, yeah. But let's not forget that Tony's biggest doppelganger is former West Indian captain Jimmy Adams. One of my underappreciated skills is my ability to spot doppelgangers. Right? It was something that I used to great effect when I used to work at Cricket, where I used to run that section. Yeah. No, what is the problem?
No. Everyone looks at you and just sees a pretty face. They're not appreciating your sticker making skills.
Yeah.
But Siddhant Chaturvedi.
Yeah, he made this wonderful comment. I think it was in a movie promo, something where he and I think Ananya Pandey, who is obviously a star child, was speaking, and he said, where your challenge ends.
Your struggles start where our dreams get fulfilled. Right. That's it.
It'll be very funny if we end up with the wrong quote. So let's just confirm what exactly he said. Yeah. Everyone has their own struggle. The only difference is जहां हमारे सपने पूरे होते हैं, वहां इनका struggle शुरू होते हैं. Their struggle begins where our dreams are fulfilled. You're right, Tony. Yeah, that's exactly what he said. Hey, better to be sure, though.
10 points to me. I am the more meritorious one.
More meritorious
podcast.
Bollywood quoter. Yeah. But he was speaking in
looks like me, so.
Yeah. So he was speaking in the context of how star kids get easy breaks, or at least they get their
Yeah.
first one or two movies easily because they are star kids, right? They're connected to the industry.
Yeah.
Whereas the
Yeah.
normal punter needs to go through a gargantuan struggle even to get to their
Yeah.
first shot at stardom.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was something similar to that I felt when I ended up in college, and I saw that kids who have come from more marginalized sections of the society, struggling to
Correct.
speak in English, having a very basic first time they've come to a city, right? They're all coming from villages. They've been in very, very, economically underprivileged sort of backgrounds, right? And
Correct.
the kind of journeys that some of these people went through over 4 years of engineering, right? Where not only are they having to learn engineering itself, which is, complex electrical engineering concepts and other subjects, but also learning,
Right.
how to actually behave and how to interact with this environment that is so alien to them and so new to them, right?
Yeah.
And I think through the course of at least my engineering education, it was a bit of I'd say one of the bigger takeaways I took out of engineering was not actually engineering education, but actually learning that there is so much more to this world and why some of these things even exist, right? We can always say that reservation is a bit of a leaky bucket problem because you're not solving the root cause of why the disadvantage exists in the first place, and instead you're trying to
Right.
provide for that handicap over a period of generations. Though at a more holistic level you need to solve it at the root cause itself, which I don't know, over a 70-80 years in India, you could say that not enough has been done to address why such a big disparity even exists. But yeah, in that sense, that was one journey that I definitely went through, where I
Yeah.
understood why
Yeah.
and my understanding of what merit is, right? You feel, yeah, there are X number of seats out of which only a few are reserved for, or only a few are available to you. But then you're also starting that race from much, much further ahead, and you are running a much shorter distance compared to the other people who are
Yeah.
supposedly competing with you, right? So yeah, that was
Yeah.
something that and over a period of time, I've also grown very skeptical about the way some of these institutions actually function, especially in India, right? And this is broader than the topic of merit itself, but I think it's worth bringing up here, though it's going broader. The first time
Yeah.
I visited the Bombay and went in one of those Mumbai local trains, right? I think it was sometime in the 2005, 2008, sometime around then, right? Late 2000s. And I remember this was a one-off visit, and so we had to buy tickets right at the ticket counter, and I could see that the general tickets for the Mumbai local was available at, I don't know, 5 rupees or 10 rupees, and they had first class tickets which were like 60 rupees or 70 rupees. I don't remember the exact numbers. And this friend who
Right.
I was with said, we should definitely get the first class tickets. I said, why do we take the first class ticket? Let's go in this. He said, no, you better take the first class tickets. So I said, okay, we took the
Yeah.
first class tickets, and then we go to the train, and those compartments
Yeah.
are next to each other, right? So you can actually see. And it obviously
Yeah.
made sense to take the first class tickets because the general tickets were extremely crowded, as we all know how the Mumbai locals tend to get. But this is what I found strange, right? The first class
Yeah.
compartment was basically the same as the general compartment. It did not have
Yeah.
more plush seating. It did not have like air conditioning. It was exactly the
Correct.
same, except that you had to pay more to get there, and hence by design it was going to be less crowded because fewer people are going to be able to afford it, and hence that is the comfort that you're getting out of paying for something like this. My
Correct.
sense of merit and education institutions in India, maybe I'm being a bit cynical, but I kind of get the sense that they are very much like those first class compartments in the Mumbai locals. And the bar obviously is not the 70 rupee ticket that you buy, but is the marks that you get, right? In terms of the
Mm.
quality of education or the quality of research that is happening in, say, the IITs or even the IIMs, they aren't
Yeah.
really doing anything cutting edge over there. The only thing that they're consistently achieving is in getting some
Yeah.
very, very hardcore fighter type people, because it
Right.
takes that kind of I wouldn't say metal, but it takes a certain amount of grit and perseverance to be able to be at
Yeah.
the sharp end of these exams and to get into these institutions. So they are obviously filtering. These are basically filtering institutions, right? They're not educational institutions
Mm.
in the sense they basically exist to get you in there. And the cynical reality of Indian life also is that we've gone through these journeys, right? As generations, our parents' generation typically were like, oh, we have to get a government job because that is what is secure, that is what will take care of us for through the rest of our lives. we went through
Yeah.
that phase in the 80s and 90s where private enterprise took off in India, and the government institutions sort of stagnated a bit. So the next
Yeah.
generation was looking at private enterprise for their upliftment and for their enhancement. So now it's all about how can you ensure that you do well in these exams and show your merit, get into higher education institutions that will give you a shot at great jobs, great salaries,
Yeah.
and that is what is going to be your emancipation or your upliftment, right? And
Right.
throughout this phase, it's sort of been ingrained into the Indian experience. I feel that you're not really looking at anyone else. You sort of have blinkers and
Yeah.
you're running as fast as you can. Um,
Yeah.
and you see that manifesting all the time, right? Indians tend to jump queues quite a bit. And we do that all the
I'm
time.
gonna.
We
I'm waiting for the moment
spitting.
where you say Indian spit.
I won't. I'm not going to talk about spitting today. But I feel that lack of empathy for a fellow Indian is not something that we cultivate. It's something that it's
Yeah.
part of the design itself because of the numbers in which we are, the kind of competitions we face,
Yeah.
the way in which our systems have failed us. The only
Yeah.
way we can sort of keep our heads above the water, right, is by
Yeah.
literally trampling upon everyone else and trying and getting
Yeah.
into a gated community. And whether it's your car, whether it's your actual gated community, whether it's the
Wait,
compound
once again,
walls
gated community with separate service lifts
with
for
separate
people
service
who make
lifts.
deliveries.
Exactly right. And that's exactly what your Mumbai local train compartments are, right? If you think about it,
Correct.
it's you're pretty much
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
It's become a part of the Indian experience, and
It's a great summary, right? But I just want to sort of peel back the layers a little, right? And probably not go into sort of how we got into this particular journey.
yeah,
Rather look at someone who sort of made a thought experiment, right? And also very, very successful in that sense, right? And this is Warren Buffett, who basically talks about the Ovarian lottery, right? And how he won the Ovarian lottery. And this is
yeah,
what he describes it as, right? When I was a kid, I got all kinds of good things. I had the advantage of a home where people talked about interesting things, and I had intelligent parents, and I went to decent schools. And I
yeah,
don't think I could have been raised by a better pair of parents. That was enormously important. I didn't get money from my parents, and I really didn't want it. But I was born at the right time and place. I won the Ovarian lottery, right?
yeah,
Um, and he also sort of goes on to create a thought experiment around it, right? Which is to say, imagine you're going to be born 24 hours from now and that you've been granted an extraordinary power, the ability to determine the rules of society that you're going to enter, but you probably aren't going to be born as you. You're going to select one ball out of a barrel with 8 billion balls, and that's you. Basically, you're saying, you have a random chance. You may not end up where you are. You
right,
can be placed anywhere in those 8 billion. And then he's like, in other words, you're going to participate in the Ovarian lottery, the most important event in which you'll ever participate. You don't know if you're going to be born black or white, rich or poor, male or female, infirm or able bodied, in the United States or Afghanistan, with an IQ of 130 or 70. It's going to determine way more than the school you go to, how hard you work, and all kinds of things.
yeah,
And sort of his next sort of thing to say is, therefore, what kind of society will you construct, right? If you accepted that the Ovarian lottery was a thing and you got to where you got
yeah,
by absolute random chance and luck, right?
yeah,
And the voices that we hear are also usually of people who have sort of won the Ovarian lottery like
yeah,
ourselves, right? Which means that it is practically an echo chamber. But if you sort of constructed this thought experiment, how would you sort of create a society, right? And that's really it, right? And oftentimes we don't sort of realize that the world as it is extremely random, and we were just lucky to be where we are. And here's another funny thing that I saw. It's a tweet. Let me try to share it. So obviously, one of the more important projects as people get richer has to been to determine your DNA, where you come from, all of those
yeah,
things. And MIT Tech Review actually put a tweet saying, are you ready for a world in which a $50 DNA test can predict your odds of earning a PhD, or
Mhm.
forecast which toddler gets into a selective preschool? Right? And there's this person on Twitter who replies with the all-time great tweet saying, you don't need a $50 DNA test. You can already do this with a zip code, right? Literally, a zip code determines where you are born, what kind of social structure you have, what
Indeed.
kind of resources who you have access to, and the prediction is already done.
So PGK, Praveen
Yeah.
Gopalakrishnan, is our good friend and part of the extended Tony Sebastian podcasting universe because he also participates in Bits and Pieces podcast. But he is the COO of the Ken, and he writes a weekly newsletter called the Nut Graph, which you should read if you aren't already subscribed to it on the Ken. So there was this essay that or this newsletter that he wrote I think a couple of years back, right, where he was talking
Yeah.
about it was not really merit wasn't the topic of what he was writing. It was about something else, but there is this wonderful paper that he quotes, right, and this is a
Yeah.
paper that is or a journal written by this person called Langdon Winner, which was published in 1980, right, and the title of that
Right.
paper is Do Artifacts Have Politics, right, and in that
Hmm.
paper Winner talks about he talks about this
Right.
strange thing about how the height of bridges, right? And you have these bridges across the roads
Oh
leading
wow!
into
Yeah.
Long
Yeah.
Island, right? And
Yeah.
so these bridges leading into Long Island, they are very low-lying bridges in the way that only
Right.
cars can actually go through the road under those bridges because they are fairly low. And this
Right.
automatically meant that only people who had private transportation could pass over to that side of town. And the public buses could not go, which was automatically excluding a certain community of people entirely, right? So people who could not afford to have
Hmm.
cars, the blacks who were typically traditionally poor,
Yeah.
were actually not able to
Yeah.
go and live in Long Island, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
exactly the sort of thing you were talking about, where
Yeah.
the kind of
Yeah.
exclusionary stuff that happens in
Yeah.
localities. And there's a more modern example of this, which is of course not friend of the pod, but owner of the greatest social network that we use, Mr. Elon Musk. One of the many companies that Elon Musk
Oh man.
has tried to
You know,
run.
this is a guy who was better off starting podcasts than companies. That's
I
that's
agree.
a
You're right,
very.
actually. Yeah. Should
Imagine if
spend.
he just
Yeah,
like had run a podcast instead of taking over Twitter. We
I agree.
would be in a much better world.
If only, right? But he's committed far graver crimes than taking over. Did I say graver crimes? Sorry. He's committed far greater.
I'm saying he did commit graver crimes also.
Exactly. He's committed far greater crimes than taking over Twitter. So one of the companies
Yeah.
that he proposed to run was this company called the Hyperloop, which was supposed to be this modern
Hmm.
mass transport system.
Yeah.
Right? Now
Yeah.
it's dead in the water. It's not going anywhere. Both Hyperloop and Boring Company, which was his idea to build tunnels underground for cars to go in, are both like extremely stupid
Yeah.
ideas. But like most of Musk's ideas, they come with a lot of bombast and are parroted
Yeah.
ad nauseum by his bunch of loyal followers, and they end up getting far more traction than they should. It later emerged that, and I think he even admitted this to his biographer, that the reason he even came up with the idea of the Hyperloop was simply to throw a spanner in the works of the mass rapid transport system that was being planned in California, which was
Wow.
his way of again ensuring that cars continue to rule the roost in that part of the
Oh,
world,
right.
so that Tesla
Right.
could continue to have a shot
Tesla.
at the future. And indirectly, what that then means is it the very nature of California, right? There are these extremely rich suburbs, Cupertino.
Right.
Yeah, some of the biggest companies in the world have these, campus towns in that
Yeah.
coast, and
Yeah.
there are certain strata of society that you will not see at all in those
Right.
towns in that entire stretch in the west coast,
Right.
and it's down to stupidity such as this that they don't even have a proper
Yeah.
mass rapid transport. But yeah, these are the kind of exclusionary things that we do in order to
Right.
keep merit, keep the creamy
Right.
layer separate. So
No,
yeah,
absolutely. So, I mean, just to summarize where we are at, right? Obviously, the starting point of meritocracy was noble, in which it basically said, where you're born shouldn't determine where you get to. But with the blind spot of not realizing that merit is not necessarily, not the lack of an Ovarian lottery, right? It's just an Ovarian lottery by any other name. And therefore, I think when we're talking about a society, we are essentially saying that on average, everyone's talents or inborn gifts are evenly distributed across the gene pool, right? However, by virtue of belonging to certain communities, castes, places, zip codes, races, countries, the opportunity is not equal, right? And this is obvious and apparent to us. But for the longest time, if someone asked me the question, which do you value? I mean, which a beautiful person was an intelligent person, right? Which is more noble, right?
Yeah.
I would automatically say, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say the more intelligent person, but I know that there's
Correct.
obviously a googly,
Yeah,
so I don't have the
exactly,
right
right?
answer. I think both
Yeah,
are equally
no, I
random,
mean,
right? Yeah,
yeah, it is not just that it is equally random. So when you're talking about something like IITs and IIMs, we'll get to that place of how the selection process works. But even before that, we are where we are because, probably, at least in my case, I was blessed with higher intelligence than beauty, right? And I live in a world where um, an aptitude for math and English is good enough for you to earn a good living, right? But
yeah,
if I were born like 50 years ago or 100 years ago in a society where physical labor was more valued, right, with the same set of skills, obviously then I am not meritocratic or otherwise I'm not going to get anywhere. Right? So when you're talking about a society, I think while we say talent distribution is statistically valid, the opportunities may not be, right, and therefore
yeah,
what kind of a society are we foreseeing?
yeah.
Any
I
thoughts on
think.
this?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's easy to theorize and pontificate, right? But the good thing in
Yeah,
the world is you actually have working examples of, say, the
correct.
Nordic countries, for instance, where
Yeah,
income disparity amongst the population is extremely low, right? So everybody is kind of middle class. There is great public transportation, and that really is the barometer, right? I
right.
don't know who said this. I think it was one of the prime ministers of one of those countries who actually said this. A great city is not one where the rich travel by, or not the one
Yeah,
where a poor can
Mayor
afford
of
to buy.
Bogota.
What exactly did he say? Again, I'm going back to you for the quote. Whether
A wealthy society, a progress society is not one where the poor people travel in cars, but one where rich people take public transport or something to that
exactly
effect,
right.
right?
Yeah, and add walking to that, which then means they're not just wealthy, but they're also healthy, right? So you want cities that can
Correct.
encourage that kind of mingling, and that's a very profound statement because the moment, and I keep going back to public transportation because that's where a city really mixes and meets, right? Because if you continue to live in your glass walls, in your glass walled chambers, you're really never going to break the barriers that exist, the disparity that
Yeah,
exists in the society. So
yeah,
so Nordic countries are a good example of this, right? Of what you would do. Now,
correct.
if you were
Yeah,
to look at our own example, like the Indian example, right? Obviously, India is a poor country. These are very, very difficult problems to solve for a country of India's size and complexity, and we
yeah,
admit that. But a starting place, right? If you were to design how this could be improved, would be to immediately say that while the ovarian lottery is not something that you can control, what can the
yeah,
system do after that lottery to try and bring everyone to a level playing field, right? Which would then mean
correct.
your public health and your uh, high school
Yeah,
education, at least your primary education at least, needs
yeah,
to be world class, or at least very,
yeah,
very high quality, and it should be entirely
yeah,
subsidized, if not fully subsidized, at least
yeah,
partly subsidized by the government, right? And
yeah,
the proof of the pudding really is the day your chief minister or your ministers are sending their kids to a public school is when you know that those
yeah,
schools are actually working. And I mean, this again
yeah,
is not, it's not utopia. This
yeah.
exists in many
No,
parts of the
so
world, but yeah,
correct. No, I mean I'm hardcore against solutionizing on this podcast, right?
yeah.
Because
But you
we
asked
have
me, how would you
partial
design
information.
that if
Yeah, yeah, no,
what
yeah. I just
the
wanted to put you down and go higher in the merit chart.
points
No, no.
table?
So the reason is that obviously we have limited information, right? And solutioning is the last thing we should do. However, we appreciate our own personal journeys, and like you mentioned, Nitin, like how we started off in one place as far as something like reservations were concerned, and now we fought it tooth and nail to now basically understanding that it is at the bare minimum that can be done, right? While still acknowledging that a lot of the social capital that we have is not available to a lot of the society, right? The second part that I wanted to get to really was when you talk about something like IITs and IIMs, and in that Warren Buffett quote, he mentions intelligence, right? And for the longest time, IQ was considered like a measure of intelligence, which is absolutely nonsensical, right? Why? Because it is a standardized test, and like the where you're born, how you take it, etc., determine that particular standardized score. Right? And it is not a measure of people's ability to grasp things or, their intuitive,
Yeah.
nature of intelligence in that sense, right? Not that intelligence is something that everyone should,
Aspire for
hold
or
in the
whatever.
highest
Right?
regard.
Exactly.
Talk about is that the standardized tests across the board are broken. Right? How do we know this? Is that if you are saying that one of the disparities that you see in society is that people based on the families they're born into have different contexts, then you would assume that something as big as a talent pool of engineering or MBAs would have equal representation of at least men and women, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the case. Nitin, in
Yeah.
your batch in B school, what was the gender ratio?
I think we had 45 girls in a batch of 280, if I remember right.
Right.
About 300, yeah, 45 and 300. It's gotten a bit better, I hear, these days.
Yeah,
but
15%, right? So my previous batch of IMK was something similar. In my batch, something massive transformational happened, right? Which was that we had, I think, around 330 people and 100 were women, right? And how did IIM Kozhikode manage to do this? Actually, as speaking today, I think I saw something in the newspaper which said IMK's this time's batch is like 60% women or something like that, right? And they've constantly sort of kept increasing it. So it was basically one guy's vision to say, how do I differentiate this university from others, right? And obviously,
nice.
The standardized test is failing, right? Which means, right, if you're just looking at a CAT score and inviting people to, sort of interviews based on that, you're already sort of excluding a large section of the population for no other reason than your belief in the standardized test, right?
Yeah.
And the standardized test is obviously biased because most likely it has been created by men who are engineers, that, this, and the other. Also, the point of a standardized test is that you can game it, which means that the access to coaching, for instance, becomes important, right? Nitin, I think I have railed in the past with you about something like Pagal Guy, right? Which I didn't find necessary at all, but just again, that is by virtue of us not needing it, right? But there are like lots of people who rely on forums, rely on coaching, etc., etc. What this means is that why do women not score highly in standardized tests? There are two or three reasons, right? One is obviously the test is not designed properly. Second is access to coaching is highly dependent on what gender you're born into. Right?
Obviously, that's by the way, that's not even true, right? Like at least in the national board exams, your CBSE exams, your state board exams, typically it's always the girls who end up being the toppers. While you're right about everything you said, the systems are designed by men. They're sort of filtering for a certain prototype. But women are actually so smart that they actually still end up doing well even in those. Sure, they might not be doing well in the CAT exam, but that's as good as saying that And you're right. There's so much to it. Like access is a huge part of it, right?
Yeah.
Like
So
women
for
are
instance,
a disadvantaged gender in that.
So for instance, if you're talking about engineering coaching, which you had to do after 11th and 12th, right? Obviously, the way I did it is after school around 5 p.m. or so, I would go to this place and take IIT coaching or whatever, right? Like, and it used to be like a classroom of 40 boys and one girl, right? And one girl is chauffeur driven, and like there is a driver always there to pick her up, right? Whereas the 40 boys are like eating parota, throwing like curry in people's faces, like getting on line buses, that, this, and the other, right? And the reason is not that women don't want to do this; it is that it is physically impossible given the constraints because societies have been like badly protective of women, right? So the moment you have a standardized test, the moment it can be gamed, then it is a function of who has access to this or who has the privilege of just going to coaching as well.
Yeah.
As opposed to say something like a board exam, where obviously like you can see that on average maybe women do better, right? And that is exactly the formula that was applied by IMK to say give more weightage to 10th and 12th. Right? So it is still objective, but you are sort of equalizing for this nonsense thing that has been happening.
Absolutely. So see, on the point of exams, right? I have so much to rail about. Firstly,
please rail.
Firstly, right? Let's talk about the CAT exam, which is the entrance exam to the IIMs, right? Now the IIMs or to all B schools, I think lots of B schools use the CAT as their barometer. Now, the B schools are supposed to impart business education, right? Management education to you. So you're going to learn finance, marketing, concepts of organizational behavior. What does the CAT
Yeah.
test you on? It tests you on your verbal ability, your ability to do math, and to interpret data by looking at tables.
Yeah.
While you are under tremendous time pressure. So they give you like five or
Yeah.
200 questions, which you need to solve in like 2 hours. You have negative marking, so you can't wing it.
Yeah.
It's just a pressure cooker, right? In a sense, it's nothing more than an entrance exam is proof that my system has failed. I have this exam
Correct.
in place because your achievement in your whatever 15 years of whatever 20 years of existence, I have no way to uh, objectively evaluate it or even subjectively evaluate it. So instead, I'm going to put you through this 2 hour filtering process, which is going to then become your, that's going to be a horoscope for the rest of your life. That's pretty much what
Yeah.
an exam says. It says, sorry, I don't know how to do this better, so I'm going to make you jump into the water now and see whether you can swim
Correct.
or float. The exam
Correct.
doesn't even have correlation to what exactly you're going to end up doing later. All it tests you for is a certain kind of aptitude for certain something which is not even relevant to what you're going to get tested for later, right? That's
Correct.
the CAT exam. Now, if you look at the JEE, you could say it's a little more custom built because it's at least testing you for in math, physics, and chemistry. But how much of engineering is actually math, physics, and chemistry, right? If you're going to do metallurgical engineering after going to the IITs, for instance.
Which I did.
Oh, very good. My brother also is a metallurgical engineer. I don't know why I said that also, but yeah.
All of us,
Yeah.
meritorious people, are metallurgical.
No, the one thing that's uniformly common for, see, we all like the gazelles in whatever, in the Masai Mara, right? We all went into
Are you
engineering
going to
college.
bring in Yuval Noah Harari?
No, I'm not. Not yet. Not this time. But we all went into engineering because that's what we were asked to do, right? We wrote these
Correct.
exams, we went in. And then 2 weeks into engineering, or definitely by the end of the first semester, because from the second semester you start having actual engineering courses, right? You realize that whatever you've learned until now is of no use because the plane of your learning, the kind of learning that you're doing is entirely different. And you thought it'll actually be an extension of whatever you've done so far because you've gone so deep into calculus and this and that, right?
Yeah.
So, and this is engineering where where actually the exam is a little custom built. Now, even that's okay. Okay, I get it. You want to test people's aptitude in the fundamental sciences before you put them through engineering. All of that is fine. And yeah, you do it with this high pressure thing where you go for it. Why do you have 500 different exams that the same kids need to take for every single college that they apply to? I've had nieces and nephews who are going through this process now. It actually used to be better in our time, and it's gotten worse now. And I always lived in the belief that things will get better with time, and our kids or will actually have a better time. I'm seeing my nieces and nephews; they're writing even more exams than we used to write. Right? Suddenly, BITS has its own exam. What is the point? Why can't you all just adhere to one standard, right? And the excuse they give is, if you leave it all to one exam, then if you have one bad day, then it's going to affect your chances across multiple different admissions. I'm like, so don't give them one chance, give them 3 chances and take the best of 3. Like, what are you trying to solve for here, right? I don't get it.
No, you realize this is not a solvable problem, right? Because if there is a finite number of seats and then there are an infinite number of people, you need some kind of sorting mechanism.
Which is where I come to my next, the next script that I have, right? So
but one second, before you go on to your next script, can I just say that the just tying this back to the last episode, right? We are obviously in a position of privilege to say our kids may not need to take all these entrance tests because they have the safety cushion of their parents having earned a certain amount, so that like those nepo kids, maybe they can go and try out what they want, right? And if they fail, we're pretty sure they'll make it enough to have a decent living, right? But when we went to college, I mean, at least 80% of my batch didn't get into NIT Warangal because we wanted to do engineering, right? It was because it was probably the one that offered you the best opportunity to earn a living. Right? So it's not even there is a correlation between the subjects that you're tested on versus what you learn versus even the ambition of someone to get into it. Right? You don't want to get into engineering to do engineering. I did metallurgical engineering and I started working in software. Right?
No, that's the point I said, right? Like our parents' generation, it was government job. Our generation, it was how do you get into a good professional course so that you can make, get to an Infosys type thing and make money later. Right? That was the route that we were set because this country is not going to take care of you, right? There is no welfare, there's no job here. Like your only salvation is that some private employer will deem you good enough to give you a job, right? That's what was put into us.
Right.
But this was the other crib, right? And so basically when our elders told us do engineering, it really was shorthand for get out of this morass, do something useful with your life.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
you'll only get that with an engineering degree or a medical degree, which is even tougher. But so this is the thing, right? So and I think this is slightly dated info. I don't know what it is exactly now, but IIM Ahmedabad selects 400 people from 2 lakh applicants, while Harvard selects 900 people from 10,000 applicants, right? Which means it is significantly tougher to get into IIM Ahmedabad than it is to get into Harvard. This is something that used to be this is something, we used to flaunt this. We used to have this on our t-shirts, right? We used to flaunt this because once you're in there, you're like, oh, I'm like so cool, right? But the point is this, right? Now, why is it that way? Like, you need to ask that question, right? For a country this big, with so many, with such a big population, why are there so few IIMs, right? Initially, and I think around the time where I graduated is when this expansion of IIMs thing started. So there's an IIM in Raipur, there's an IIM in cities that I did not even know existed. And I think now there are about 25 or 30. And initially I used to be like, why are they opening more and more IIMs? They're diluting the brand. But the more I think about it, that is exactly the way to go. You need to have more of these institutions. But you also need to do more than just opening institutions and fixing a brand name to it. You also need to actually make them quality institutions, which even the originals probably aren't. Right? But
you're in country fixing mode.
I always deeply think about the country, so as you're aware. But it has to be fixed, man. It has to be fixed because otherwise we continue to live with this thing that this guy is so elite because he went to XYZ, he cracked this exam, he got this certain rank. But that whole discourse reeks of a system that has failed is what people don't get, right? And that is sad. I feel.
No, it's not like so. Couple of different things, right? One is obviously, like if you have it. You flaunt it, right? I don't think you need to feel guilty about.
I don't feel any guilt about it. No, I'm not. That's not what I was saying.
Not you. I'm just saying I don't feel like one needs to feel like privilege is not equal to guilt, right? But also at the same time, it is about understanding that you've been given this leg up purely because of the Ovarian lottery and like how whatever you ate for breakfast on the day of the CAT exam or whatever. But the point is that over a long enough horizon, the hope is that people will have more opportunities, right? Like your first job out of your B school is never your first job. Nitin, you famously ditched everything and went to cricket, right? So, and I think this was Sidin who had mentioned on Simplified. Basically, his what is it? Commencement address was given by Raghuram Rajan, who basically said, this IMA degree is a piece of paper that means you won't starve. Now you can go out and do whatever you want, right? And so Sidin basically quit consulting and went to become an author, and he texted Raghuram Rajan and he's like, what is wrong with you? Why would you take commencement addresses seriously? Don't do all this nonsense, right?
All I can remember about my commencement address, by the way, was it was delivered by Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Arguably on the hottest day I've ever experienced, sitting in that gown in 45 degrees weather in April in Ahmedabad.
Wait, what about wedding in Noida in August?
Second biggest. That was the second hottest day. But
you just remember that it was hot.
Yeah, I don't remember what he said. I remember trying to stay awake. So I'm actually surprised that Sidin took the commencement address. Actually, not commencement. It is the valedictorian address, whatever you call it. Yeah. Summa cum laude. Give some speech.
No, so I feel like so in a system where there are more people than there are opportunities, you'll obviously need markers to have shortcuts, right? And even if you're like, I'm guessing you've hired people at some point in time, you're obviously not giving everyone an equal chance, right? You're basically looking at a CV, some things you're glancing over, something catches your eye, and that's how you're gonna do it, unfortunately. Which is saying that is not merit, right? It's just like luck in some senses.
You're defending the fact that there aren't enough institutions to accommodate the demand.
So, where I was coming to was basically what happened after after our batch had 100 women was that the internship procedure started, right? Like placements. And everyone was up in arms because the women got selected first, right? And men were like, this is like so, men as in me, like we were all like, this is so unfair, that this and the other, right? And two parts to it. One is that because of this change, actually, in my batch for the first time in IM Kozhikode, TAS came to recruit in my batch, and that's how I got into TAS as well. Which again, like, is one of those things. Like, I don't know why people still keep repeating, right? Like, I never introduce myself as this person anywhere, but wherever I go, people use this marker to sort of state that okay, he's a guy of quality or whatever, which is bullshit. Anyway, it's just like random luck. But the other thing that I wanted to mention was that how diversity is actually the only uh, diversity is actually a big strategic advantage, right?
Absolutely.
Because you
Yeah.
think extremely differently. The way this became or like a funny incident which happened at that time was funny, but later I thought was profound. Was that we were watching Kill Bill in B school, right, in one of our hostel rooms, and there were like 4 guys and 2 girls or something like that, right? And like there is this obviously Kill Bill has a lot of action sequences. There is this sequence where I believe, what is her name, Gogo, the girl in the Japanese girl, right, with the
Nishi. Yeah,
no,
the little girl.
the Japanese
the little girl with
the
the
thing that yeah.
with our army.
And so we're all watching the blood and the gore and the action, and suddenly, like from like one side of the room, there are 2 girls saying, "Man, her skirt is really nice," and I'm like, "What?" Like, this is a perspective that if it was just a bunch of guys, you'd never have gotten. Right? Like, you're not even looking at the skirt, and like
I mean, you are, but you're not really noticing the skirt for its beauty. But
Nitin. Okay. Are you going to edit out this fantasy or not?
Absolutely.
Time will tell.
It's about you, so I'm not going to mention that.
Yeah, correct. Happy birthday, Nisha, apparently. Anyway, so what I was saying was that, yeah, so it is not a thing that we even looked at, right? But that's what diversity brings to the table, is that have just by virtue of having people from across spectrums, whether it's gender, whether it is class, whether it is social background, etc., you are going to have much better business outcomes as well. So it is only logical that in that sense, right, when we speak of maybe governments can't fix it, and it is, I don't think it is a job of governments to fix everything, right? But like corporations will inevitably move in this direction where they sort of understand the value of diversity, right? And that's probably one hope you have.
Yeah, I agree. And on the point of corporations or the corporate world trying to fix things, right? We've obviously seen the Ashoka University, for instance, which has become a bit of a force to reckon with in India now, right, in the liberal arts space, which is an example again of private enterprise coming in and trying to address a certain need gap which the government wasn't able to, right? And hopefully you've seen, like, there are hundreds upon hundreds of engineering colleges across the country, potentially of very spurious quality, a lot of them, but at least you're seeing people rushing in to try and provide solutions, right? And the same even in not, I mean, this little tangential to your point, but broadly in India, you're largely seeing in the last 25-30 years that private enterprise is what has taken everything to the next level, whether it is public health, whether it is
that is as it should
education.
Be, in some senses it is as it
not
should
really
be.
Right? In the most developed countries, health and education at least
but there
are
is
not I know that it's not, I mean, these are not easy to do in India, right? I completely agree with that, and I'm not saying that, I'm not blaming the government. So
one key difference, Nitin, if you think about it, the US education system is completely screwed. Like, maybe you can complete your schooling, but to go to college, you basically have to make sure that you work for the next 20 years paying back that mortgage or loan.
Quite broken. Right? It's quite broken.
Which is not the case in India. At least you can, be a graduate and get a reasonable first degree at least without
no, you're right.
being in debt for the rest of your life, right?
No, you're right about that, right? Yeah. So, and honestly, even if there's a systemic intervention, right, you would really expect it to be there at the lower levels, at the lower age, and not really at the higher education end of the spectrum. You want to actually give people the tools, give kids the tools so that they can find their calling and eventually, hopefully find ways to express themselves and become model successful citizens. But I mean, not in the interest of solutioning at all here, right? For me, other citizen. No, so I live outside India, and I think soon so will you be living outside India. There is obviously this dominant.
You try to get me kicked out.
There is a dominant
Yeah, go on.
discourse now, right, of people moving back to India, right? People who have lived in the
Yeah.
US and saying, "Oh, this is India's decade. This is India's century.
Yeah.
I want to build in India," right? Which is what these product
Yeah.
managers all say, and they want to come back,
Yeah.
etc. And you often see, they create these Twitter lists, the listicles where they say, "Okay, why you should move back to India," right? And
Right.
within the top three things that they will say is one of the things they will always quote in a very tone deaf manner is the access to cheap labor, right?
Correct.
And I think it is sad that if you've gone through that journey of merit, you managed to
Yeah.
actually go to elite institutions, you managed to go abroad, you managed to make a living for yourself,
No.
and then you
Once
come
again,
back. Yeah.
important point here is that if you've sort of gone abroad to study
Yes,
from India,
exactly.
you've probably gotten through affirmative action, right? Which is really there to make sure,
Correct.
the
As in diversity,
underprivileged,
yeah,
underprivileged people make it to the college. Except who gets to make it is the elitist of elite
Yeah.
from India, right? And there is a
Exactly.
beautiful irony there.
There is an irony there because institutions are looking for diversity, and their way of getting diversity is by getting Indians. And so Indians and Chinese, by the way, are overrunning a lot of the institutions in the US, right? Education institutions,
Yeah.
which is again to be expected. Lots of these are the most privileged people from these countries.
No, but then having taken affirmative action, then to come back and say you are against reservation or you are
not only that, I mean, this is not even a topic about reservation, right? For them, it's more it's an observation they're making about India, that it's a benefit of living in India is the easy access to cheap labor. And
correct.
And they don't even realize the reason why it is like that is because these systems are broken, right? They see it as a feature and not as a bug. The reason why cheap labor is available is because there's nothing else for the poor people to do, right?
Yeah.
But that's a sad and I'd say slightly pessimistic note on which I wanted to sort of bring this to a close, at least in my mind, because we continue to want to live in glass cages as far as possible, right? Because we're sort of been forced in that system, and we want to continue to live in that system.
It's a tough one, right? Like if you have access to labor that is cheap, would you not use it? Right? Like,
no, that's fine.
Obviously,
but not being aware of why the labor is cheap and why it exists so plentifully here and not available in the other countries, and making that a point of advantage for your country or a point of differentiation for your country. US is so expensive, I can't even get someone to come and clean my house. That is exactly why it is a better country. You need to understand that. If you don't, then you're fundamentally perpetuating the problem.
It is because
it's easy to say that caste is behind
the mayor
us.
of Bogota has said, right? The mayor of Bogota has said a developed country is not one where cheap labor will be available to clean your house. It is where everyone cleans their house themselves.
Cleans their own houses because there's nobody who's asked enough to come and do that job because it's too menial. It's not paying enough. Yeah.
Correct. Or there are better paying jobs.
And for me, that's the saddest thing about the Indian way of life, that there is not enough that's being done to really annihilate caste in India, right? No, it's true, and we've lived through this, right? We're not seeing that change at all. It's in fact, and it's getting actively perpetuated, continues to get actively perpetuated also, which is sad.
Yeah. No, so like. I mean, like there have been protests across the board, right? Like what so-called quota students have to go through is unpardonable, right? And if you're doing like, let's say, a PhD or something, then you're totally at the mercy of your advisors, right? And by and large, Indian society continues to be casteist, and they have there is a definite way in which sort of marks are given based on your surname, etc., which happens across the board, right? And that is really sad in that sense, that even the definition of merit, when it is not when it is a subjective answer paper, is again determined by your surname in many senses.
How do we close this now?
I feel like this has been one of our more ranty episodes. So, but thanks to our friend Prashant DP for asking us to speak about this. This is where we are with Leftover Lasagna episode 14.
Is it 14? Yeah.
Any closing? Yeah, it's 14. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
It's actually a great time to celebrate because 14 is actually 1/3 of a year, right?
How did you make it to I am dad? Hey.
So when did we start this podcast? It was in March, April, May, June. Yeah. We completed 4 months. 28th Feb, I believe, is when our first episode went.
Okay. If you say so.
I do say so.
We have completed a
So
month
we-
because
we-
we have actually not maintained a weekly schedule, right? We missed a couple of
Which is
weeks.
why I said
somewhere.
weekly-ish.
Weekly-ish.
Yeah, and correct number for a year is 42. No? This Douglas Adams is said. So we'll end up
Oh.
with the
If-
answer to life, the universe, and everything.
If
by the
Douglas
end of
Adams
the
said
year.
it, it must have merit. So yeah, we'll go with that.
Correct. Okay, on that note, thank you for sticking around for yet another episode of Leftover Lasagne. If you have birthday wishes from your friends that you want read out by Nitin, we'll soon release our subscription model. But for the rest of you, please hit the free subscribe while it's still available. Hit the free 5-star rating before we charge you for it.
Yeah.
Before Nitin realizes his merit as a
Yeah. No, our future
well-wisher.
subscribers will have to write a 2-hour exam, and only people who make 99% and above will be allowed to subscribe to this.
There you go. There you go. Beautiful. On that note, this is Tony and Nitin signing off. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.